Oh, perfect. And that is us live. Thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in. My name is Jack Baker, and I am coming to you live from the final day of this year's NAAEE conference. A little bit about me. I'm the host of Pangolin, the conservation podcast, which explores underappreciated, misunderstood conservation stories. But the most important person today is not me. I've said enough about myself already. We are, of course, joined by the wonderful Leia Althauser, who is, and I've written it down so I don't mess up the title, who leads the Community Involvement and Education team at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in the run-up to the conference, there was a number of workshops held. She was also involved in from habits to habitats, inspiring conservation behaviour. And I'm sure we're going to dive into that and a lot of her other work throughout the conversation today. So thank you so much for joining me today, Leah.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Your podcast is so cool, and NAAEE has guided so much of my career. So really, it's just such an honor to be here and to talk with you and to talk about NAAEE things.
Yep, I think it's my favorite time. It always comes around so fast, and then when it's here, it's my favorite time of the year because you're surrounded by passionate, wonderful, incredible, amazing people. And the best thing about the podcast is I have an excuse to just sit and talk to some of those passionate, amazing, engaged people for the excuse of like, oh yes, I'm doing it for professional work reasons, but actually it's just me being interested in what everyone does. It's fantastic. And I introduced you a little bit there, right, with your workshop title and your job title, but I always find people are so much more than the job title we ascribe to them. So do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell them a little bit about what it is that you do in your work?
Yeah. So I live in Olympia, Washington. So I'm in Washington State on the West Coast. I work for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we are the state agency who manages the state's fish and wildlife. And so every state agency in the United States, or every state has an agency that manages fish and wildlife. And so if you don't know, you as a citizen or as somebody who lives in Washington, you actually you get decisions over how your state manages your fish and wildlife. And so I think that's a pretty cool thing. And so one thing I really love about my state is that we're working really hard to try to give to inform and engage and empower our constituency over how we make decisions with them. And I think that with part is really important. And so my career, I kind of say I have an open door policy on my career. My background was actually, my formal background was I got a bachelor's of science in journalism. I was always really, really fascinated by the natural world and asking people questions and talking to them. But that when I was in school at the University of Oregon, had a really cool opportunity to volunteer at a local raptor center there, the Cascades Raptor Center. Big shout out to them if anyone knows them. And it took over my life, really, just having a relationship with animals and having a relationship with people and getting to talk to people and really seeing like the light bulb over their head. Sometimes I say metaphorical, but sometimes it was like, oh my gosh. And seeing people connect with animals and hoping that when they left that facility, maybe they were making behavior change decisions to then want to protect wildlife in the same way that I did was really important. And I think that was the spark of my career that led me to wanting to learn more about education, about conservation psychology. And so that's led me to a series of places across the West Coast. And for the last 5 years, I've been so fortunate to have incredible colleagues here in Washington and been working a little bit in education here. But the last year, I've been the community involvement and education manager. And so folks on my team do community partnerships and outreach, volunteering, watchable wildlife, Habitat at Home, which is like, it's a cool program where it's like helping and learning about fish and wildlife and habitat where you live, work, and play. So like helping to make it really relevant near you. And then conservation education, which where what my master's work is in, and also, of course, uh, kind of what we're here today to talk about.
Yes, yes. You have done the perfect intro. I always love when a guest lays everything out so perfectly for me because it sparked 100 questions I want to ask, and I know we only have half an hour, but I think we could sit here for hours discussing all of that, and I think it's amazing. I had a similar experience. I always like finding these moments of connection with guests, and I think when you look across the environmental field and in moments like this, at conferences like this, and at events like this, you find it so often these moments where you go, I had that similar click. And mine didn't come at a raptor center. I had a similar moment. I worked for my local aquarium. I got a job as I was finishing up high school there, and then I kind of did it throughout my undergrad degree and had this moment of like, oh, this is what I enjoy. Like I love studying. I did politics and international relations, and I loved. Yeah, that was great. That was wonderful. But then it was like that spark happened more. My joy and my love kind of like, yeah, sparked it at that moment of seeing people have their light bulb moments with animals, seeing that thing where I told them something I took for granted because I love nature, so of course I knew about this thing or that thing. Like, and yeah, so it's always nice to see those little parallels, those moments that people have. Um, I guess that's kind of
But I
led.
think in that,
Oh
if I
yeah.
may add, I feel like in your podcast, I've heard you take the politics and international national relations like with your education, and you can like mesh those things.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the beauty of education is like it can be so diverse and
Hmm.
interdisciplinary. And if folks haven't heard, or if you've never looked into NAAEE's guidelines, they have a whole bunch of different guidelines. I look forward to talking about some of the community engagement guidelines later today, but the guidelines are part of the parallels is that they're so interdisciplinary. You can
Hmm.
bring in all of these different things and make them relevant to the different people, like policy, like
Hmm.
international relations. Sorry to cut in there, but it just gets my brain thinking.
No, and that's provided a perfect link. And I'm going to ask you more about the guidelines in just a second and how those kind of connect to your work and how you use them. Because I know you when we were discussing this before, you were kind of like mentioned them as something that's kind of a really like nice part, a guiding part of your work. But before I do that, I have to ask a little bit. I wonder if because you said you started journalism, right? Like,
Yeah,
does that
yeah.
still inform what you do, or do you think that maybe in the way you tell stories and the way that you do things?
Yeah, absolutely. I sometimes people joke because I never was actually like a journalist, and they're like, "Well, was that degree useless to you?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. I use my journalism degree every single day. I
Hmm.
took like interviewing classes. I took how to write classes.
Hmm.
I used it was graphic design and layout. Like I use it was such an interdisciplinary degree that I
Hmm.
use it every single day, and I feel like it I'm so naturally curious that I know how to
Hmm.
ask really good questions, and I know how to interact with people, and I know how to research and investigate. And so
Hmm.
I couldn't have asked for a better degree, I think, to lay a
Hmm.
foundation for what I do.
Hmm. I think that's the thing, and I think it's a growing thing, right? Is like my master's. Once I did my undergrad in international relations, my master's was interdisciplinary, and having those moments of assessing the whole field and being able to go like, oh, we need to draw on all of these different things that are usually so siloed. I think is such an important, wonderful, incredible skill to I feel very lucky to have been given that skill at the time I was, and I think it really has helped me as well develop. um but yeah, before I talk too much about me, this isn't about me, this is all about you and your work. And I think we before we get into maybe talking about the workshop and the things that you ran, I think maybe framing it seems to be that you use the NAAEE kind of community engagement guidelines a lot to kind of frame the work that you did at the workshop and some of the other things. So I wondered, before we get into discussing your work in exactly, do you want to tell us a little bit about those guidelines and how they play into your work, and yeah, just to frame the discussion that goes forward.
Yeah. So for anyone watching this, if you aren't familiar with the guidelines and if you haven't peeked into them yet, I and you do environmental education or community engagement or are just curious, like I run, don't walk. Google it, look up NAAEE guidelines. They're not they're made to be easy and simple to use, and they're literally like toolkits. They're not just guidelines, but they're actually like toolkits too. And so I've used the environmental education ones, but so in and maybe we should take a step back and I just want to give a huge shout out to Bora Simmons.
Hmm.
She's done so much incredible work on like also living, walking the walk of these guidelines. She really gets user input on them, and I know so many different people have put effort into creating these. Um, but for the community engagement guidelines, I use them a lot in my work for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife because we're not specifically environmental education only. We're really
Hmm.
looking at things from a community engagement level of like, we're managing wildlife on a population level. We're not, a lot of zoos and aquariums are looking at things um, as guests are coming in on kind of that individual level. They're trying to chain things for small
Hmm.
on, you know, they're looking at guests on that environmental education level. But for us,
Hmm.
it's like we want people to be informed and involved. And so when I took the Guideline Trainers Bureau workshop with Bora in 2022, it was just like, oh my gosh, these community
Hmm.
engagement guidelines are just what I'm looking for. Like they are basically the user manual I didn't know I needed for human interaction. And you're like,
Hmm.
okay, Leah, what does that even mean? Like we're
Hmm.
humans, we can interact with each other. But it's like simple, sometimes like I found this, and I don't know if you felt this way, Jack, like sometimes the simplest ideas are the ones that you're like, duh, like it's
Hmm.
like, why didn't I think of that? And so like one of the guidelines, it literally gives you permission to be like, you probably need to assess before you're ready to engage with the community. Like, are you actually ready? Do you have the tools before you can commit
Hmm.
to working with this community? Because it's a commitment, it's a
Hmm.
relationship. Relationships require maintenance. And it's like, yeah, that's
Hmm.
a pretty simple idea. But it's this sort of thing where it's like, yeah, it's really simple, but having it written down on paper and then having sort of an assessment
Hmm.
to actually think about it has been so helpful. And so um, there's a guideline number 3 within this community engagement toolkit. It tells
Hmm.
us to build and sustain partnerships, and that sounds kind of fancy, but it
Hmm.
just means like be a good friend and show up. That
Hmm.
consistency piece is really important because a lot of times I think it's like we want to build a partnership, we want to do the work, and then we don't continue to follow through. We don't
Hmm.
continue when they have a celebration to go through for
Yeah.
them. Um, as we talk through here, I don't want to say I'm a foodie. I just actually love eating. And so for me, whenever I'm like initially meeting a partner, I'm always bringing snacks, like even if it's just like a bag of
Hmm.
popcorn or like, I don't know, Sour Patch Kids. Like I just love, I don't know if you have that in the UK. It's like a candy with
Hmm. No, I know the ones.
okay.
They're
Okay.
very
Okay.
they're phenomenal. Yep. Yep.
It's but just this mindset of like I'm building a friendship here,
Hmm.
not just a transactional relationship.
Yeah.
I think it's really reshaped how I've think about programs, how I've thought about programs, and how we try to design programs. And we
Hmm.
stopped trying to measure success by how many people are showing up to our event, and we've started trying to ask people how are you feeling? Do you feel like you belong here? And
Hmm.
interestingly enough, we're looking at a lot of the social science coming out, and it's showing that when people feel like they belong, they're actually taking ownership of that.
Hmm.
And when people have ownership over a resource, guess what? They're stewarding it and they're taking care of it. And that's what's going to lead to long
Hmm.
term sustainable environmental behavior, right? So
Hmm.
I think that the engagement guidelines are a simple, easy to use resource. 10 out of 10 recommend. Go
Hmm.
use them, folks.
Yeah, I find that with a lot of the NAAEE guides, like the one that I draw on, it's not maybe relevant to this discussion, but another one that if you're looking to measure your impact and what you've done, the connection to nature guidelines. I don't know if you've read them that have all of the different indexes and ways of measuring, and it can be participatory mapping, or it can be interviews, or it can be scales, or it can be all of these things. Like I tend to find the NAAEE does an excellent job of taking what seem like big, complicated, scary topics and going, here's a booklet, here's a guide, here's everything you need, and give yourself permission to, yeah, read through them. Like even the simple things, right? Like that we would forget and be like, yeah, of course I would be nice to people, and I would try and form a friendship, or like it does that, but it also takes it the next step to ensure that you're kind of doing it properly, right? It gives like a weight to the things we assume, or the things that we think we know. It kind of challenges them a little bit, but also gives weight when we think we are on the right track. So yeah, no, I always get back. I always love a good NAAEE guideline booklet. I think they're phenomenal. And I wondered then, because we have you at the end of October, you ran a workshop with, was it Jason Beal? Yes,
Yeah.
which was your from habits to habitat. That's it. Shouldn't be a tongue twister, but it gets me every time. Inspiring conservation behavior, and I wonder, like, how does how does how did those two things come? Did those two things link in some way? Does your education and kind of awareness of these guidelines lead to this presentation? And then, yeah, how did that kind of pathway go, and what did you then end up presenting based on it?
Yeah. So Jason and I, this workshop, so this is the second iteration of our workshop.
Mm-hmm.
We gave it earlier at a social science conference called Pathways. And so this workshop is our kind of love letter to every educator who stared at, a curriculum or
Mm-hmm.
a flyer or something that they've worked on, and they're like, why isn't what we're doing working? Like, why are humans changing their behavior? Why
Mm-hmm.
are we still feeding bears? Why are we still, why are we still not like coexisting? Why are we still
Mm-hmm.
throwing, things in the garbage that shouldn't be thrown? Like, recycling is so easy. You just like put it in the other bin. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this seems like it should be a thing that we could do.
Yep. Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
so Jason and I have similar backgrounds, but also sort of mixed. And so we brought together sort of our similar but mixed backgrounds, and we used social science and conservation psychology to sort of like get real about what motivates people. And spoiler alert, it's not the graphs, it's not the guilt
Mm-hmm.
or the graphs in guilt form. And we sort of tried to get at like, how can we align our programs with what truly actually drives action? And that's
Mm-hmm.
people's values, their lived experiences. And again, going back to that sense of belonging and what they're experiencing. If it's not real and if it's not relevant, we, it's probably not going to stick. We tend to be rather hedonistic as a species. And so,
Mm-hmm.
the long-term thing that's going to happen a year from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, it's hard to think about,
Mm-hmm.
especially geographically far away. The glaciers in Antarctica, it's hard to be like, well, that impacts me, even though it actually does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how did that then translate into? So you come together and you have this passion, this interest. How does that translate into a workshop format? Because I feel like that's such a big question, that to condense it into a workshop where people come in being like, so what's the answer, must be a really tricky thing to do. So how do you take all of that and form it into a workshop?
I would say we have no answer. Jason and I, you probably hear this when I'm talking to you. Um, Jason and I are brevity is not either of our strengths. We're quite verbose, but we translated by sharing our examples of like how we're working on campaigns and like some of the behavior change campaigns that like we're working through. And so we use some examples of some research that's going out there, and then we put together a toolkit of tools that we've used for folks so that they can start to try some of that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we don't have the answer, but I think from a conservation psychology standpoint, it really is finding like a root of like what is in it for your specific audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's probably going to be like really different depending on who the audience is
Mm-hmm.
and what their motivations are. I think a lot of times, like, I work for a state agency. My state is really rather large, and geographically speaking, there's a large mountain chain in the middle of our state. Even just geographically speaking, our the motivations between the state are quite different. The cultures
Mm-hmm.
are quite different. Um, sometimes our geographic center, our population center is Seattle. Sometimes people call it the state of Seattle because Seattle gets to make a lot of the decisions. And so that cultural center is also quite different. And so it's working for a state. Yes, my job is to serve the whole state, but these different parts of the state have different motivations. And so I think a lot of times too, it's like scaling down. And even though we serve the whole state, it's like trying to scale down. And I think we just try to do too much. I think maybe that's where my long-winded answer is getting at. Like, how can we scale down, find what really works, and then replicate and scale back up to what works for different people?
And I suppose that's where the importance of having things like the community guidelines comes in, right? Because that teaches you when you scale down to these, like, because community can be a group of people who gather together once a week, have a shared interest, small group. Or community can be a town, a city, a state, a country, a continent. The community can be so many things. And so I think that's the thing, right? Of like having these guidelines to go back to when you're dealing with this small group and getting to know them and referring back to them perhaps helps when you try and expand out. Is that right? Or is that maybe...
Yeah, absolutely. And so the example, in the workshop, the example that I use is we're in the process of launching our Love Cats, Love Wildlife campaign. And so we know that in the US, one of our largest threats to biodiversity is outdoor cats, outdoor house cats. There's a whole, I'm not going to debate it. There's lots of research to support this. And so we, instead of wanting to target keeping all cats indoors, like that's a huge thing. Like we're not going to be successful if we say we're going to try to keep all cats indoors. And so we did some audience, the campaign team did some, audience analysis. And we honed it down to this campaign is going to focus on new and prospective cat owners within a really specific geographic area. So we're actually just focusing to start with on a couple of counties. And then if that works, we're going to try to scale up. And so rather than trying to start with even new and prospective cat owners within the whole state, we're starting small, seeing if that works and replicating up. That is kind of, I think, the sort of thing where I'm talking about of like, let's not try to start big, fail, and then be like, well, that didn't work. Let's start small, make adaptations as we go, and then see what works. And I think historically with the cat thing and why it hasn't worked is that we've tried to keep all cats indoors all the time. And I don't think that is, there's different motivations for why different people keep their cats outdoors. And we're not addressing with keeping all cats indoors. We're not addressing all of those separate motivations.
I think that's the thing, right? Is every conservation issue, every environmental issue, there will be 100 different ways of looking at it, and trying to understand all of those 100 different ways can be really tricky. But it's something that we have to try and do and try and monitor and move and adjust our approaches so that we are making sure to take into account the probably very valid reasons for that we as like environmental people, conservationists, sometimes we don't necessarily want to see. It's because we have data that makes our argument. Sometimes we're like, but why? Why would they not do this? Why would they not? Like, we have to be able to break those walls down and be like, oh, okay, where are my biases? What are their biases? How do we do all of this? I think that's really interesting. And I was going to ask how that applies. I think I was going to ask how a lot of this work applies to the work you do with kind of WD. Oh, I was gonna nail it there because I had it written down and then I stumbled over my letters. WDFW. Yes, I think I was right. Like, is that the best example of the work that you do with them, or is there other examples of how that kind of
I think that's one example. Like the work that we do is the work that I do is honestly so broad, and so that specific example is with our Habitat at Home program. So that's the program that I mentioned is where people live, work, and play. That's the kind of really program that's focused on urban audiences and trying to get urban audiences to connect with fish and wildlife. we have our watchable wildlife, which is wildlife viewing. And so we know that wildlife viewing is, one of the largest economic drivers for wildlife in the United States. We also have volunteering. I'm so passionate about volunteering because it fueled my drive into conservation. It sounds like you had a really similar experience. And so we're looking for pathways into careers. We're looking for, folks who have retired or people who are just looking to serve and give back. So we have different campaigns going within our volunteer program. And then we also have community partnerships and outreach. And so that team is looking at creative ways of getting multicultural new audiences involved in fish and wildlife in a way that maybe in a way that they have actually been excluded in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like, something else we'd talked about, and I know we're kind of not running out of time because we've covered so much. So I say that like it's the clock's fault that we've said we've run out of time. But we're getting towards the end. But something I did want to touch on is part of that kind of that narrative of how do you begin to bring more people in and begin to kind of include more people in the work. And something you'd mentioned in running up to this was the idea of partnerships. And I wonder, is that how that feeds into the work?
Yeah, I think partnerships are the foundation for this work. They are, on this team, it sounds like it's a lot of work, and it is a ton of work, but there's like one person doing each of this work for the entire state. And so because there's like one person doing each of this work, it's like we can't do this work without partners. And to be honest, the partners know their communities the best. They are actually best served to serve their communities. So how can we be best positioned to provide them the resources and help them engage in the way that they actually want to engage? Because traditionally it's like, I may want to go for a hike, but maybe they don't want to go for a hike. Maybe they just want to have, lunch in the park with their families or something like that. And so I think that partnerships are like friendships. Like you don't need to agree on everything, but if you have a shared sense of purpose and you're willing to bring snacks or have lunch together, like that's great. Like look for shared values, not identical missions. I think for a long time there's been a sense of like, oh, we have to agree on everything. You don't have to agree on everything. You can have different purposes, but you can come together for like one thing and one shared value, and coming together for that one shared value of like, we both agree that we want to get our community outdoors is like an awesome way to like move forward. And so like going back to the cats example, like a cat cafe may care about animal welfare. Well, WDFW cares about biodiversity. We both care about healthy, thriving communities. So like that's our shared value there. So that's why WDFW is partnering with the Cat Cafe. It's like an unusual partnership. The trick is like showing up when they don't expect us to. So it's like reducing that transaction. And so I'm going to the Cat Cafe to buy coffee, not just as a WDFW employee. I didn't wear my cat earrings today, but I actually have like cat earrings that I bought at the Cat Cafe. Show up to celebrate their events, celebrate their wins, help them with an event. Those small gestures, that consistency that I was kind of talking about earlier, build trust faster than like a formal memorandum of understanding or any like paperwork or document ever could. And this is an example of guideline 1.4 and 1.5 in the community engagement of focusing on shared priorities and reaching beyond unusual partners. Like who is on your team already and you just don't know is there. Find that common ground, expand the table. The best collaborations start with good conversation and honestly, food. Bring food. I think food is the unspoken trust building. Like have a meal, have snacks, have coffee. Like I think everything that I've ever done, and maybe it's just because I revolve around food and I'm always thinking about my stomach, but bring food.
In the half hour we've spent together, I think that's becoming very clear. Is that like we've talked about food an exceptionally large amount, and I love it that there are a number of references to food that have happened throughout this just brief half hour conversation. I'm like, someone is clearly food motivated here. Like snack motivated is the key for success when it comes to Leah. That's phenomenal, and I think actually that actually puts a nice bow on, I think, a lot of the conversations we've had throughout. I wanted to give you a chance. So I have a couple questions just to wrap up in a second with how people can contact you and things like that. But before I ask you those, is there anything else we didn't cover that you think, oh, I should mention this or I should talk about, or are we good? I think we covered quite a lot there.
Good. Yeah, I could talk to you forever though. Um, I would just say like this work is, I would say, community building and relationship building is like um, new and uncomfortable, and it takes you away from capitalism. So allow yourself. What I've heard from people who I really encourage this to is like at first it's kind of new, and you're like, but I'm having coffee. I'm at a restaurant. I'm or I'm at their facility with them. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel like work necessarily, and but it's okay. Like I just
Hmm.
want to give people permission that it's okay, because it's just as important. And I think relationships are the foundation to how we bring people along in this work. And so I think that's what I want to say.
I think that's a beautiful message to give people to take away into their last day of conference. I think that's perfect. I will ask you though. I know we have to wrap up very soon, but I'm going to ask you quickly anyway because it's the question I've asked everyone. And as I said at the start, I'm the host of Pangolin the Conservation Podcast, which is about underappreciated stories, underappreciated species. And the question I like to ask everyone who's been on the podcast and been involved in the podcast and all these things is, what is your favorite underappreciated creature? And I wondered if, Leah, you could give us one to think about on this last day of the conference. What is the animal, the creature, whatever it could be, a plant if you want to do plant, whatever it is that people don't look at enough, what do you want to shine a spotlight on for this last day of conference?
Ooh, okay. Favorite underappreciated creature. Um, mm, I'm going to say the Suckley's cuckoo bee. It is
Okay.
a Washington species of greatest conservation need.
Mm-hmm.
It actually it's cuckoo bees are interesting in that they'll actually lay their pupae in another bee's nest, and then kind of like the cuckoo bird, they'll
Mm-hmm.
take over. And so we don't unfortunately know a ton about why they're
Mm-hmm.
declining. So we're kind of like learning, but I just find that whole
Mm-hmm.
behavior really fascinating. Pollinators, I think, are also just in general kind of an underloved species
Mm-hmm.
that are so important for the rest of life. And so I'm going to say Suckley's cuckoo bee.
I think that is a perfect answer. I think because we've had a couple mammals, we've had a plant. Somebody mentioned a bird the other day, and now we've got an invertebrate as well. I think we've covered now through the podcast interviews all bases. So I think that's brilliant. And I think, yeah, invert conservation always underappreciated, misunderstood, and not enough. An excellent choice. Just to wrap up, before I let you go, is there anything, if anyone's listened to this and is intrigued by your work and wants to learn more, where would you point them to learn more about what you do?
Yeah, you can go to
Hmm.
www.wa.gov
Hmm.
dash wild dash wa.
Hmm.
We have a whole set of curriculum on there. It's all very Washington specific. We're big into place based, regional. There's also a contact us, get involved. You can learn about a lot of our programs on there. You can put in some information, and you can figure out how to get a hold of either myself or one of our staff member. It'll get routed to one of us, and you can get a hold of us. Um, it's been such a pleasure. I've had such joy talking to you this morning. What a great way to start my morning.
No, it's been my absolute pleasure. And I will make sure that when this is uploaded to YouTube and to wherever else the podcast streams or wherever it goes, I will pop the websites and everything we've mentioned we'll put in the description so everyone can find that nice and easy. And I'm sure you will have lots of interest in all the things you have said and done, because it's been exceptionally fascinating and a beautiful way to start my last day of the conference as well, even though it is now almost 4 p.m. here. It's the start of the day for me. So thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I'll also say Pangolin, the conservation podcast, podcast I host, is available on all streaming sites. On social media, we're at Pangolin Podcast. I'm at the Only Jack Baker on Instagram. Go and check out my work if you're interested. I would love you to. And I also presented at the conference, so if you're here, you can watch the recording of that as well. Just search for Pangolin Pride, and we talked about that. So thank you so much once again, Leah. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. I hope you enjoy the last day of this year's conference. I can't believe it's come around so fast. But thank you so much, and yeah, thank you so much, Leah, once again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. And right, enjoy your conference, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.